If someone is a fan just of modern day CSGO, or maybe they've only watched CSGO, they never saw CS 1.6, they never saw any of the history or even the early period of CSGO maybe, I could entirely understand why they would think that Markelov, this Ukrainian player for Hellraisers, is overrated, or they'd think like, why do people always talk as if he could be a star, or mention him as if like that's the category he should be in. I totally get it, because actually in CSGO he never has lived up to what the expectation level seems to be for him. But if you know his history from 1.6 and you know some of the things we've seen at times in CSGO, you'd know why this expectation will probably always be there. So who is Markelov? Now, the first time Markelov really appeared on the scene in the West was around like end of 2007 going into 2008, this sort of era, 2008 mainly. But actually he was always around in the CIS scene in Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, all these countries who would play together. They would play in tournaments at like the Cyber Arena in Kiev. They would play around this area. They would have lots of small little tournaments, ASUS tournaments, and the key thing was all the players you know now from this region who were old enough at the time or whatever did play in all these tournaments, and they played each other a million times on different teams, mixed teams, sometimes just different teams swapping positions for years and years and years. And so he was around since he was a young guy, 15, 16, whatever. I don't know his age now, but I think it would be around that sort of age. But he really became known in the West sort of like 2008, and he was playing for a team, Hellraisers. Now, don't get confused because the fact he's in Hellraisers now. This was like a Ukrainian-only team, and it featured some people like, actually I won't say because I can't fully remember, but I think Kucha might have been in it at the time. An Angel maybe. No, actually, I'm thinking the wrong era actually. But anyway, he played in this team. And this team was where we first noticed him, because he would go to some of the tier 2 or more like the tier 3 events, tier 2 and tier 3, and he would have some good halves, and a POV demo would come out, and people would talk about, oh, look at the great AWP shots he was hitting. And then his team in later years, like he had a very brief spell in A Gaming, Amazing Gaming, where they were the best when they had Blade and Starix and all these guys, Craftic at one point in time for a very short amount of time. He had a very brief period in them, then he went back to DTS, and in DTS he got Edward with him, and this was a good period for this team overall, and they had some good results. But at the time, everyone just thought of him as he's a skilled player, but about the best you could hope for from him and his team was like a top 8 finish. Maybe they could crack a top 8 at like a tier 2 event. They were never going to get to a big major or win a big major crucially, but they could maybe crack a top 8 there. Now, as a player, he used the AWP quite a lot, but he had a decent amount of rifling. He was a good rifler, not a very good rifler, a good rifler. And as an AWPer, he was someone who seemed very confident in himself, but actually his effectiveness wasn't that high. Like, he would take lots of crazy shots, and he would try very difficult shots and just go for it. He wouldn't like set it up, but he would whiff a lot of them too. I'd say he maybe hit like 40 to 50% of them. He reminds me more of like JW just before JW got to this really strong period now, where like, yeah, you saw some potential maybe to be better, but it wasn't quite realized. Now, when he got into Na'Vi in 2010, a little bit of background story for that team, because a lot of people don't know this. Na'Vi as a team actually was created at the whim of a guy who's like a multi-millionaire in Kazakhstan. And he told Starix, this veteran, legendary Ukrainian player, like, create a team that's like players who take ego out of it. I don't care if these guys like each other, they don't share it, if they have history, if they don't. Just make the best team for Ukraine that you can to represent it, and it'll be called Na'Vi, and I'll fund you for a year. And so Starix set about finding these different players, and this is the lineup he ended up with. Now, in this team, as they started out, immediately from their first event, it became obvious that Markelov was the best player in the team. And after 1 or 2 events even, it became obvious that he was one of the best players in the whole world. And now his development over the end of 2009 towards 2010, which is when the Na'Vi period began, to early 2010, the very beginning, is one of the most startling I've ever seen, because all those aspects I said of like, he had these skills, but with the shots, suddenly he just wouldn't. Suddenly he was hitting all those shots. Suddenly his performance level, all those other parts where it hinted at something, it was no longer a hint, it was no longer like a tease of something, it was right there, he was doing it. His game was just completely on. And so he not only became the best player in the world, I mean, he had the best team with him, so that helps you be it. But I used to say in the past, cause Neo did exist still, cause Forest still exists, because Get Right was there, I used to just say, you don't have to call him the best player, but you can't deny he's the most effective player. So once Na'Vi became great, he was like a really great player, and everything about his game worked. And because he was in a best team and in the ideal role, he was the most effective by far. He had the biggest game impact of any player in the whole world of CS. Now, what strengths did he have? First of all, as a CT side AWPer, he was unreal. Like, I've never seen a player hold one spot like he did. Like, the player beforehand, who I always thought, I mean, I still think the best player of all time with the AWP is Kogu, because when Kogu would hold a spot, his consistency of how high his hit rate was, of course he was like a slower tracking aim type guy, he would just always make sure he had the shot, then he would release and he would hit the shot. So it meant like the reason you couldn't attack his position is because you just knew he was going to hit AWP shots on people and get 2 or 3 kills or do a lot of damage and delay you. So it felt like you were running a brick wall to go there. Markelov was even worse than this, because first of all he had a greater team than Kogu did, but crucially Markelov had by far the fastest firing speed we've ever seen with the AWP, yet one of the highest accuracy hit rates you've ever seen. Like, he would be top 2 or top 3 hit rate ever, and he's number 1 for firing speed. So you would rush his position, and not only was he going to get shots, kill you and do damage, but he could kill 4 or 5 of you, because he would just bang, 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 maximum speed possible in terms of the reloads time on the scope. It just decimated you. And so on certain positions, the 2 that come to mind is when he would play the ramp going up to a bomb site on Dust 2, he would hold that angle over towards the catwalk, and he would just get so many aces and highlight rounds there. Even in massive games, it was unreal. And then the most famous one is on CT side of train, he would play outside on what was the bomb train. And this is basically the, let me think, it goes like, it starts inside in the numbering, so I think it would be like the 4 train. This was the one where he would look there down to the pop dog, the little ladder that the terrorists come down to come to the outer site. And if you jumped over there, it's like he just never missed. He would just kill everyone there and around that electric box. He was just unreal. We've never seen a player like that at these positions. Just absolutely amazing. On top of that, not only was his AWPing unreal, but first of all, he wasn't just a CT side AWPer. On T side, there were certain positions where he would just terrorize you. There's a very famous game at ESWC in, I think it was in the round of 8, the quarterfinals against Fnatic, when Fnatic's one of the other great teams of the era. When Forrest on Dust 2, he's playing CT side, and Forrest keeps trying to go over the doors and come in through the doors to go lower, and Markelov just stays looking down the normal terrorist sniper spot, and he hits Forrest something ludicrous, like 11 rounds in a row, and he's just hitting him or he's killing him, and Forrest just gets absolutely dumpstered and has a terrible, terrible half and just can't deal with it whatsoever, and Markelov's just terrorizing him, and the game's almost won just off that half alone. So best CT AWPer, incredible T-side AWPing as well, and knowing when to set shots up and what shots you can hit. Not only that, usually with a great AWPer, usually the rifles aren't that good. That's kind of the limiting factor that stops him dominating the whole game. Markelov had really good rifles for an AWP, as in if he'd have never AWPed again, he would have been a top 10 player in the world just on his rifles alone. Pistols, he was a really strong pistol player too. He really was. He had like the complete package. He might not have been the best in every area. Like, he wasn't the best rifles, he wasn't the best pistols, but he was like top 10 pistols, top 10 rifles, top 2 AWP. Like, it was just incredible, the scope of his game. Not only that, he was pretty good at clutch rounds. He wasn't like a monster at clutch rounds, but he was good. He wasn't someone who ever had any deficiency. He never shied away from them in a sense like Forrest sometimes would. He was more like around the Neo level, where like they were great players and you knew they would win clutch rounds as well. So that made them even more dangerous. Allowed them to close games out and beat big opponents in big matches. A big factor for Markelov is his composure / performance level in big matches. We're talking semi-finals of majors, finals of tier 2 and majors. I've never seen a player in history who always performed like this. Before that, I always used to say Potty. But the thing with Potty was like the all-round master player who was the great clutch player, but he wouldn't then also drop like 30 on you. Like Heaton would do that, or Spawn would do that, and then Potty would like close the round out for you. He's the closer, you know. Markelov, it's like he would drop the 25 and 30 kills, but he'd also just be dominating in all the big parts of the match. He'd be hitting all those 25 frag CT halves on Dust 2 that would just shut it down. He'd win the train for you every single time. So that as a result, Na'Vi won 3 majors in a row in 2010. All 3 majors. That's never been done in CS history. Then they won the first major in 2011, so they won 4 majors in a row. Like, no one's ever won 3 in a row. They won 4 in a row. Then they made 5 major finals in a row total, but they lost the 5th one, so they still only had 4 overall. Part of the reason why is because Markelov always was the best player on the server in every one of these finals. He always does the best on Train, their home map. He would usually have a very strong Dust 2, and then he would have a decent Inferno. So whatever the combination of who you were playing, what maps, this guy would win you the tournament. The rest were all very good, and his team complimented him in a very special fashion. But in big games, this guy was unreal. Like, yeah, Neo is a better player in the history of CS 1.6. Forrest is a better player in the history of CS 1.6. Potty is a better player in the history of CS 1.6. Markelov didn't have enough years to be the best, and I don't know if he would have, because his team dropped off a bit afterwards, so maybe he never would have won more. But in terms of big game players, this guy's number one. As in, if I had to like bet my life on a big match in Counter-Strike, and I had to pick the player to represent me, I'd pick Markelov, because I know I'm going to win. I know I'm going to survive. He's going to beat whoever it is, and I'm going to be alive afterwards. As a result, his team won the prize money record. They made all these finals. Like I said, they were the team of the year, even though they were from Ukraine, a country that had never produced anyone who'd even won a major tournament before. They were the team of the whole year. Remember, Sweden dominated Counter-Strike. Denmark was an extremely good country. Poland produced the Poles who won all those majors. And yet along comes this team from Ukraine, and Markelov's the best player on it, and they dominate and have the best year in history. The weird thing about Markelov was, though, all these skills I've described here, but even towards the end of 1.6, he had a weird mentality. In 2010, when winning was fresh and new, and they were loving it, and it's like, well, how many more can we win? We've won one, let's go for the next one, let's win one. They had this insatiable appetite to win and conquer and be champions. At this point in time, he was in his element, everything was set up, it was all great. The big problem came from like late 2011 onwards, because now there started to be these weird murmurs, and I would sometimes talk to Markelov and he would tell me these things, where he'd tell me like weird things in interviews, like, I don't want to be just thought of as an AWPer. And I would think, like, what does that mean? Like, you're the best AWPer, you're the most effective AWPer, and you're dominating all the games when you play with the AWP all the time, every time you can get it. That was the thing. He had something in his mentality where, I think, partly because of getting bored of playing that role or lacking some motivation, he wanted to do other things. He wanted to, you be the AWPer this time, I'm not going to do it that much. Or I don't want people to only think of me as an AWPer, as though that was like a limitation of skill. I want to be a great rifler, and I want to do these other things. I want to entry sometimes. So as a result, even though he was the god with the AWP, he actually started in his teams giving up some of the AWPing positions to Starix, who before was the secondary AWP. Now as a secondary AWP, Starix was bang on, he was really good, he had a consistent tracking style, he would watch certain positions, and he was a great lockdown secondary AWPer. But and in fact, to give you an example, this would be the equivalent of if in that Titan team, Kenny S just said, you know what, I'm done with AWPing. Kaylee, you just take all the aggressive AWP roles and you do that from now on. Like, that'd be like, well, no, Kaylee is a really good secondary AWPer and he was a good passive AWP, but why would you wouldn't put him in Kenny S's roles? He can't do what Kenny S can do, and he wouldn't be as effective as Kenny S. And now Kenny S will be less effective. That's basically what Markelov and Na'Vi started to do. And I even used to hear these murmurings that within their team, they decided that Starix was the better AWPer than Markelov, which is like, is this even real life right now? Because that's not even within the realms of possibilities. I don't know what the fuck was going on in their team politically in terms of relationships that they would ever think that. So as a result, I feel like there was some motivation issues towards the end of 1.6, and so that's why when we come into CSGO, I'm not as surprised that he's never got to the max level, and that he's had some issues, and that he's switched roles, and that he's been in different teams, and he's just never shined as an individual player. Now in early CSGO, when Na'Vi got in and they had like a pretty decent result at ESH, like Mad Cats Vienna, they come like round of 8 or something, but they played games very close. It was actually a legendary game. In this particular scenario, he already looked pretty good, and then he went to these star ladders, and you were like, wow, he's actually he was already a top 10 individual player. He was doing well, and actually he'd have moments, where he'd shine and he'd look really awesome. But he never truly got to that elite level. He never had the completeness and the 10 out of 10s in all these different areas and the great, like, top 10 here, best player here, great kind of composure. He never had all the factors that made him a great 1.6 player. And so that was early on. As CS went on, his impact on games, his importance to his team, his performance level, game in and game out, has gradually degraded. It's never gone totally into the toilet, but it's just degraded a bit. And it feels like now he's in a position where, first of all, these Astana Dragons and Hellraisers teams, their slow style just doesn't seem to fit his style of play. He's a very fast, up-tempo sort of player. You put him in his position, he gets all his shots off, he goes aggressive, he kills them all. That's his style of play. Secondly, he just doesn't spam the AWP enough. He should be a Kenny S type guy where every time the money is available, if I was his team leader, I'm giving him an AWP and I'm telling him, listen, you can only be in this team if you're the full AWPer, and I want you to go for every shot you can like you used to, lock positions down, terrorize the team. That is your job, is to punish them with the AWP. And you might think to yourself, yeah, but it's different in CSGO, maybe you just can't be a good AWPer. There is a video of Markelov, I can probably find it on YouTube if I look it up. If I find it, I'll put it in the description box, where he's playing CSGO, CSDM in CSGO. And he's doing the same thing I described from back in 1.6. He's going for every AWP shot, he's hitting a ton of them. It looks like, wow, this guy should be a primary AWPer, but he doesn't do it in games. It's a mentality thing now with Markelov. So anyway, that's who Markelov is. You can see why, if you understand this guy, the best big game player ever, amazing in this sense, you can see why we always feel like if we're from 1.6 he should be, or he could be, if he wanted to, if he had the right team, if he dedicated himself. He hasn't, and at the moment it looks like he won't, but that's why we have that expectation.